All right, we're all here. Let's give ourselves a hand for showing up. Woo. My name is Tatanka Brika. I am pleased and deeply honored to be asked by Barbara to introduce her. Her introduction is worth the price of admission before she speaks. First, I just want to say it's an honor because Barbara is, as probably most all of you already know, a dogged, thorough, courageous investigator. She is a protester in the original Webster definition of protest, which is from the Latin protestare, to witness or tell the truth. She's a truth teller. Barbara Honegger is a leading researcher, author, and public speaker on the 9/11 Pentagon and anthrax attacks, and is the visionary activist behind the 2 billion candle power third beam spotlight shown into New York City skyline on the 9th anniversary of September 11th, as well as the Boston Tea Party for the 9/11 Truth, which was the historical inspiration for the Tea Party. Unfortunately, she said. She is the creator, producer, and co-narrator of the 9/11 Museum virtual walking tour. There's a link to this, which uses the actual exhibit items in Ground Zero Museum itself to prove that the official conspiracy theory of September 11th is a lie, with over 80,000 views on YouTube, and also the author of video documentary on the Pentagon attack, Behind the Smoke Curtain, which you can pick up the video in the back, right? With over 300,000 views on YouTube. 500,000 now, this is dated. Woo! Barbara has served in high-level positions in the federal government, including White House policy analyst and special assistant to the assistant of the president. We all know which president that was. Her pioneering book, October Surprise, on the deep story behind the Iran side of the Iran-Contra scandal, now confirmed by formerly classified documents and a recent deathbed confession by top Iran operative Dwayne Dewey Claridge, was reported in Newsweek. This led to a full subpoena power congressional investigation funded at the level of the 9/11 Commission. From 2000 to 2011, Barbara served as senior military affairs journalist at the Naval Postgraduate School, the premier science, technology, and national security affairs graduate research university of the Department of Defense. She was the only invited researcher to testify at both the historic Toronto 9/11 hearings on the 10th anniversary of the attacks and the follow-on Vancouver hearings. Barbara is one of just 50 founding current and former high-level government, military, and intelligence officials to call for a new 9/11 investigation at patriotsquestions911.com, and one of the 20 charter members of the Political Leaders for 9/11 Truth. Ms. Honegger holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from Stanford University, a Master's of Science degree in Experimental Psychology from John F. Kennedy University, master's level certification in national security decision-making from the Naval War College, and has run for Congress to represent the Monterey area, first in 1994, special election to fill Leon Panetta's vacated seat, and this past year as a Bernie Sanders independent. It was great honor, pleasure to introduce our courageous, our local champion, Barbara Honegger.
Thank you so much. Got a lot to cover. Title of my talk is It's a Lot Worse Than You Think. And who are we talking about? We are talking about this guy. Who is Trump really? What does this remind you of? Destined strongman leader. Only I can save the nation. Promises an economic miracle for the nation. Demonizes and scapegoats weak groups in our society. White supremacist websites referred to Trump as the glorious leader. During the campaign, they still do, i.e., a Führer. Mr. Trump retweeted posts during the presidential election campaign by white genocide. Foreign presidents, multiple foreign presidents in multiple pre-election articles, including in the New York Times and the Washington Post, including op-eds by very credible people, likened Trump to Adolf Hitler. This is just one example. White supremacists, neo-Nazis continue to flock to the Trump campaign, and he didn't do anything to discourage them. Now you're going to see some information that will shock you. It did me when I uncovered it. Does this really go too far? We will see. Trump was actually addressed in his office in Trump Tower with Heil Hitler. How do we know this? Trump's wife, Ivana, who is the mother of Ivanka, that beautiful blonde-haired daughter, who is married to one of his top White House advisors, she said in her sworn deposition for their divorce proceedings, Trump kept a book of Hitler's speeches by his bedside reading. Also in this article from Vanity Fair, I highly recommend that you read it. It's online. There's the link. And by the way, I will make these PowerPoints available to anyone who gives me your email address. And this presentation, I understand, will be on public access TV here in Santa Cruz shortly. And then these slides will be inserted in this video and will soon, I understand it, be on YouTube. So it won't be too long. A quote from this article, and here's the link. Quote, Donald Trump appears to take aspects of his German background seriously. John Walter, who worked for the Trump Organization at the time, when he visits Trump in his office, Trump's own wife told a friend he clicks his heels and says, Heil Hitler. I meant to bring these books. I actually ordered them from Amazon. The bedside reading book was the first volume. This is volume 2. Volume 2 of Hitler's compiled speeches, his bedside reading, has recently been published during the election campaign with both Trump and Hitler on the cover. Not only Trump's rhetoric, the content of his speech, but his mode of delivery consciously mimics Hitler. Trump's America First slogan was the slogan of the pro-Nazi America First Committee and the pro-Nazi America First Party during Adolf Hitler's rise to power and World War II. Trump's senior campaign advisor until August, when he was forced out, Roger Stone, one of the most despicable individuals I have ever come across. What Donald Trump learned, this article, what Donald Trump learned from Joseph McCarthy, Red Bader Joseph McCarthy's right-hand man, and his mentor in turn, Roy Cohn, who was not only the mentor of Roger Stone, but also a critical mentor of Donald Trump. And you learn about that here. Shouldn't be surprised that the Red Bader, the man behind Joseph McCarthy, is also behind Donald Trump. So here are Roger Stone's, this is from his book, Stone's Rules for War, Politics, and Life. And as you'll see, this is the template for the Trump campaign, how he rose to power. Hate is a stronger motivator than love. Politics is not about uniting people, it's about dividing people and getting your 51%. Well, he didn't even get 51%, did he? Hillary Clinton got almost 3 million votes more than Trump, which is sticks in his craw to this day. Quote, the only thing worse in politics than being wrong is being boring. Well, he goes out of his way to say everything that comes out of his mouth is shocking. Nothing is on the level. Attack, 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 never defend. He certainly does that. Never pass up the opportunity to have sex or be on TV. Well, he certainly followed that rule. Stone's Rules for War, Politics, and Life. And Roger Stone was one of his top senior advisors in the campaign until August. Roger Stone was also, for about 2 decades, a partner in the high-level Washington, D.C. Lobbyist firm with none other than Paul Manafort, who until August, not surprisingly, not coincidentally, was the campaign manager for the Trump campaign, and is one of the top individuals who is being investigated right now by the FBI and by the Senate and House Intelligence Committees for collusion with the Russians in this campaign. So who are the real basket of deplorables, if you remember that from the campaign? Well, of course, it's the individuals that Trump has selected to be in his cabinet. From Trump's Monster Ball, a great article in the New York Times, quote, Trump is assiduously assembling a team made up of billionaires, bigots and racists, misogynists, homophobes and Islamophobes, climate change deniers, and white supremacist believers. That's the true basket of deplorables. They're called the cabinet of the President of the United States. So just some examples of these bigots, racists, and I should add white male supremacists. They don't give a damn about gender equality. Just the opposite, as you will see later in this presentation. Trump's father was a member of the KKK. We know that from an official police report. Trump declined to repudiate the endorsement of former KKK Grand Wizard David Duke during the campaign. White House counsel and chief strategist Steve Bannon, who's now infamous, rebranded white supremacists and Nazis as so-called alternative right when he was the CEO at Breitbart News, and then mainstreamed this redefinition of the Nazis and the white supremacists during the Trump campaign. Trump's Attorney General, former Senator Jeff Sessions, was actually rejected as a judge by the then Republican-controlled Senate confirmation hearing for his record of racism. He fought for public school funding inequality and is a stalwart foe of immigration. He's now our Attorney General. God help us. Trump's chief White House advisor and strategist, Steve Bannon, again, quote, in his roles as editor of Breitbart News and as a top strategist in the Trump campaign, and now as chief strategist and political advisor in the White House West Wing, Bannon was responsible for the advancement of ideologies antithetical to our nation, including anti-Semitism, misogyny, racism, and Islamophobia. There should be no place for such views in the White House, and this by a top rabbi. This is a massive protest to Trump's naming of Steve Bannon as the White House strategist. A lot of good that did. Yeah. The Stormfront radio show, this is during the campaign now, named after Hitler's Nazi stormtroopers, said that Trump's then immigration plan, which he's now putting into effect, to arrest and expel 11 million individuals in this country, they called it, quote, the greatest political document since the Magna Carta. Unquote, if you can imagine. Hitler also initially proposed mass deportations of undesirable German citizens, did he not? Until he couldn't get rid of them all, and so he chose another path. To carry out Trump's plan will require massive Gestapo-type raids on homes and businesses, which have already started, and mass detention in camps already built, remember, across this country by Cheney's Halliburton, when Cheney was vice president. A Trump spokesperson publicly floated the World War II detention of Japanese American citizens, which, recall, was done merely by a presidential executive order, as a precedent for doing so. Trump is actually impeachable right now for his campaign's collusion with Russia. There is no question in my mind whatsoever that his top campaign individuals, Paul Manafort, Roger Stone, Carter Page, I believe, and others in the campaign actively colluded, and including his top attorney, his personal attorney, actually colluded with Russia during the campaign. It's not just that the Russians did it and Trump liked it and encouraged them along in his tweets. No, they were actively colluding. So what do we have on the screen? This link, and I have a copy with me today. You can look at it. You really must, if you haven't already, go to this site, and you must download and read every word of this infamous dossier. Now, you have been led to believe that this dossier, this intelligence dossier, that there's really not anything in it, folks. Just keep on moving, don't look here. Well, that's not true. It turns out if you actually do the research and read all the way down in the New York Times and the Washington Post, etc., you learn that the author and the researcher of this report was the top British intelligence MI6 agent in Moscow. You can't get any more credible than that. So you have to read this for yourself. Maybe if you'd like to ask a question, I can give you more of the details about it. Now we're going to get to the importance of 9/11 truth for defeating Trump and the great danger of Trump. So why did Trump win? This is my opinion, but it's a very educated opinion. I believe that Trump won, that he put it this way, he wouldn't have won without this. I believe that Trump won the election because of the hyped up fear of the fake, false link between immigration and radical Islamic terrorism, the claim that immigrants could do terrorist attacks in this country. Both of these are based on the 9/11 lie. So I love this cartoon. This is the Trump worldview that he managed to copy in the heads of the 63 million people who, God help us, voted for him. So everybody over there in the Middle East is a terrorist, and everybody down south, they should have added Mexico, is a rapist. And then there's him, because he's the US, right? Just like Hitler said, I am Germany. Reaction to Trump's surprise win. This one really resonated with me. This was just a reaction of somebody in shock the night or the day after the election in November. It feels like 9/11 all over again. The shock of that election was just as great as the morning of 9/11. I happen to, this is a link which you will have, you don't have to write it down. I'll be happy to give you my PowerPoint slides, and they will be on YouTube soon. These slides will be on YouTube along with this video. I've already done a presentation on public access TV in Monterey on the rise of Trump and why 9/11 still matters, but we're going to be going into that here also. Now, the last time that a presidential candidate secretly colluded with a foreign power as the Trump campaign, and there's no question in my mind, with the blessing and the guidance of Trump himself, colluded with Russia with this campaign. The last time that happened was what? 1980 in the October surprise, which happens to be my book. Happens to be my book, which many people don't know, but amazingly, my book was on the cover of Publishers Weekly. It was on the cover of Publishers Weekly back when it was first published in 1989. So, what is the October surprise? Just briefly, for those of you who don't know, the Reagan-Bush Sr. campaign, and we're going to see that I was a top political appointee in the Reagan White House and Justice Department. We're going to get to that in a moment. To let you know how I know what I know about some of the rest of this presentation from the inside. The Reagan-Bush Sr. campaign in 1980, in particular in October 1980, therefore the title of my book, October Surprise, the Reagan-Bush Sr. campaign colluded secretly, treasonously, with the Khomeini regime, which, like the Russians, were then considered to be enemies or at least rivals. They colluded with the Khomeini regime, which was then holding our 53, but most people think it's 52. So I'll say 52 American hostages in Iran. They were holding them against their will. They'd taken them hostage from the U.S. Embassy in Tehran on November 4th, 1979. So in October of 1980, to prevent Carter from being able to get the hostages out before the election, which the Reagan-Bush campaign, and I was at the very top of it, I knew from the inside that we had done focus groups. And we learned from the focus groups that if Carter successfully brought the hostages home in this narrow week-long window between October 18th and October 25th of 1980, that he would win, Reagan would lose. So what happened? George Bush Sr., who was then the vice presidential running mate with Reagan, he secretly meets along with William Casey, who then, because of it, became the first CIA director under President Ronald Reagan. They secretly meet in Paris on October 18th and 19th, 1980, and cut this secret deal with the Khomeini regime so that the Khomeini regime would not release the hostages to Carter. Reagan would get in, Reagan and Bush Sr. would get in, and then once they were in, with a little delay to save face and to try to make it look like there wasn't a causal connection, which there was big time, that then $5 billion worth of arms started flowing to Iran with the Israelis as middlemen. That is my book, October Surprise. It was a highly treasonous collusion with a hostile foreign power. And that is precisely what is now being investigated by the FBI. Not seriously, because Comey's in charge. Yeah, right. Comey, who basically put Trump into office by his collusion with the Republicans as head of the FBI. But they're also investigating the Trump campaign collusion in the Senate and House Intelligence Committees. Just in today's news, by the way, and we're now February 27th, 2017, Monday evening here in Santa Cruz, California. In today's news, not surprisingly, the Trump White House has refused to cooperate with the attempted goal of having a special prosecutor to investigate potential collusion between his top campaign officials and the Russians. Of course, they don't want that. Of course, they've got a lot to hide. My Behind the Smoke Curtain now has over 500,000 views on YouTube. That's really incredible. Now, you get that number if you go on YouTube. The top one has 250,000. A separate one has 200,000. You add them all up, and it's way over 500,000 now. And my 9/11 Museum virtual walking tour that I did with wonderful Bonnie Faulkner. Many of you probably listen to her fantastic Guns and Butter radio program. I think it's Wednesdays at 1 o'clock on KPFA, carried on Pacifica radio stations across the country, including the flagship WBAI station in New York City. She and I are the guides through the official 9/11 Museum. And you might see on the disc label here, can you see official lie? That my videographer or my graphics person has put on the outside of the 9/11 Museum building at Ground Zero. So that now has over 130,000 views. So that's updated from Tatanka's introduction. At the time I wrote that bio, there was only 80,000. So it's getting over, it's about 132,000 as of last night. Kevin Barrett was, I introduced Kevin Barrett a few months ago here for that great presentation he gave on the history of recent U.S. false flags. Some of you probably were here. Many of you might not know, I don't think that was announced that night, but the first time in 15 years that the Left Forum, which is, as I understand it, I'm told, that it's the largest gathering of progressive activists and researchers, authors, etc., in the country. It happens once a year in New York City, City University of New York, I believe it was. The first time ever that they allowed 9/11 Truth, a 9/11 Truth panel or forum, was last year, and Kevin Barrett and I were the speakers there. So you've now had both of us here in Santa Cruz. By the way, Kevin Barrett just emailed me. I will be interviewing for his radio show called Truth Jihad. If you go to truthjihad.com or truthjihad.org, I'll be his next radio show guest, and we're either doing it live or recording it this Thursday. I will let Maureen know, and she can let you all know. But it will be carried by No Lies Radio, and if you miss it live, whenever it is in the next few days, you can go to No Lies Radio and listen to that interview on the audio archives. So what you have here is a photograph of those of us. We are having our victory celebration, having broken through into the Left Forum for 9/11 Truth last year. And you can see Kevin over on the left there. And if you notice, In the back, Cheryl Curtis, who is one of the two main organizers, along with Catherine, known as Kat McGuire. She's pointing up on the ceiling or on the wall, and when we reserved this room for our victory banquet afterwards, our victory dinner, we didn't know that it was the Twin Towers room. So she's pointing up to a sculpture of the Twin Towers on the wall. That was a nice synchronicity. So very briefly, if you'd like, I'm going to get a show of hands. I have about 8 slides here that I could quickly go through. There's some of the slides from my 2016 Breakthrough Left Forum presentation, which would give you some idea of how we know that the 9/11 official story is a lie. I can either skip those or I can do them. Who would like to see them? Okay, we'll do that. These are just some of those slides, but it is on the internet under Left Forum 2016. Okay, so probably what this slide is, these are the original seismic records, times of huge events underground at the World Trade Center on 9/11. And what this proves is that there were massive deep basement explosions in both World Trade Center 1 and 2, the Twin Towers, both of them, in both cases, well before any plane hit above. Wow. So, that's like 9/11 Truth 101. The wonderful group headed by my colleague and friend, Richard Gage, Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, co-founder, CEO, and president. They now have something like between 2,600 and 2,800 licensed architects and engineers who have now signed their petition calling for a new 9/11 investigation. They focus mostly on World Trade Center 7 because there were 3 tall towers, not just the 2 Twin Towers, but a third building, World Trade Center 7, that came down in a classic controlled demolition that requires the pre-placement of explosive demolition charges throughout the building. And it's a classic controlled demolition. It came down about 5:20, 5:21 in the afternoon, and it wasn't hit by any plane. So they start with that fact. They believe that that is the most important fact to wake up the public to the fact that the 9/11 official story in New York City has to be a lie. I actually think this is a stronger piece of evidence, that even a kindergartner can figure out that plane impacts and the fires therefrom, and anything that was a result of plane impacts and the fires therefrom, have nothing to do with massive explosions in the deep basements of both towers. In the first case in World Trade Center 1, 14 seconds before a plane hit, 90-some stories above. And in the case of World Trade Center 2, 17 seconds before any plane hit, 70-some stories above.
What's the source of that information?
It's from the same, I believe it's Columbia University. I'd appreciate hold your questions till the end. But it's from Columbia University, from the same official seismic recording station that is used by the federal government. This is truly official information. And these deep basement explosions are required for controlled demolitions. You talk to anybody who does controlled demolitions, you not only need the pre-placement of explosives throughout the World Trade Centers 1 and 2 and World Trade Center 7, not hit by any plane, but you've got to have your deep basement explosion. And that happened in both cases before either of the Twin Towers were hit by any plane at all. This is another slide I used in my presentation at the Left Forum. By the way, both Professor Kevin Barrett and I have been invited back to give our 9/11 Truth presentations at the 2017 forum, the Left Forum in New York City, and that in turn will be live streamed, as we'll see in a moment, live streamed by No Lies Radio again. So you could see that live streamed, and it will also be archived at noliesradio.org. And by the way, No Lies Radio is run by a magnificent 9/11 Truth activist and IT wizard named Alan Reese out of Berkeley, California. He's wonderful. This is another slide. These are the so-called red-gray chips, and we now know that super militarized ensulfurated nanothermite is the red on these red-gray chips, that in some of them still unignited, that are in the dust of the World Trade Center. And that's also proof that there was military-grade nanothermite in the dust that was, at least in part, responsible for the explosive demolition of the towers in World Trade Center 7. This slide is from my left. These are all from my left forum presentation. This is just to show you now we're moving to the Pentagon attack, which is my expertise. My YouTube and DVD that's in the back of the room behind the smoke curtain, that focuses on the Pentagon attack. My 9/11 Museum virtual walking tour covers all aspects of 9/11. World Trade Center 1, 2, 7, Pentagon, and Pennsylvania. So it's more broad. But getting to the Pentagon now, why we know the Pentagon attack official story has to be completely false. This just gives you a layout. That little red dot there on the screen is where the official story says a Boeing 757 going at over 500 miles an hour hit the building. And presumably, according to the official story, went in 3 of the 5 rings and created an almost perfectly round 16-foot diameter so-called exit hole in the inside of the 3rd of 5 rings into the building, so-called internal penetration damage path. And over here is the heliport, where the H is because the Pentagon had its own heliport for VIPs and Secretary of Defense, then Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, and the President of the United States to helicopter in so that they wouldn't have to drive in. And most people don't know, on the morning of 9/11, if the attacks hadn't happened, any of them, but especially the Pentagon attack, President Bush, who was down in the school in Florida, was pre-scheduled to arrive at that heliport at the Pentagon between noon and 12:30. And what actually happened at the Pentagon, I prove in Behind the Smoke Curtain, is a massive attack of pre-placed explosives. Same stories at the World Trade Center, but inside and outside the Pentagon. So they basically blew up literally the place at the heliport where the President of the United States was due to land in about 2.5 hours, 3 hours. Okay? So the next slide is from the Pentagon Building Performance Report, and it shows this alleged impact point. So going back, where the red circle is now where the right arrow is. That's where allegedly the plane hit, and that white kind of triangle going in is the official story alleged plane penetration destruction path on the inside of the building, okay? However, that left arrow is where a critical 9/11 Pentagon whistleblower named April Gallup, bless her soul, she is so courageous. She has gone public letting us know for years that at her desk, where the red arrow on the left is, there was a massive explosion that killed a lot of people. She miraculously survived, and that's where her desk was, and that explosion went off inside the building at 9:30. At 9:30, and the official lie of what happened at the Pentagon claims that nothing happened there until a Boeing 757 hit at almost 9:38 at the right arrow. So again, any kindergartner, 9/11 Truth Pentagon 101, you can be certain that something that happened, a huge explosion at the left arrow at 9:30, couldn't have been caused by something that happened almost 8 minutes later, whatever it was, plane impact or otherwise, period. Now, this is the Pentagon lawn after the attack on the morning of 9/11, at the right arrow. See that right arrow just off? That's what you're looking at here. It's basically a pristine lawn. However, at this heliport, where you see the H, which is at least 100 to 120 feet further to the left along the west wall of the Pentagon, which means further to the left or the north, guess what happened? That's what happened. Whoa. So that's the heliport where the President of the United States, George W. Bush, was due to land at the heliport 3 hours after that happened. You think that was a message to the President? these clocks, these are Pentagon clocks. The first one, the one on the left, is from the Heliport Tower. Right there, this building to the left, you can just see beyond the fire truck, which was the Heliport fire truck. Just in case a helicopter crash, they would always have a foam truck there, a fire truck. And just to the left of it is the Heliport firehouse, the roof of the Heliport firehouse. So the clock on the left here is from the Heliport firehouse tower. And it was stopped by a violent event at 9:32 and 30 seconds. The official story says Flight 77, or any kind of plane, whatever, didn't even approach the building until almost 9:38. The clock on the right is from the Naval Command Center. The Naval Command Center was 2 and 3 rings further into the building. And notice that that clock is stopped at 9:31 and 40 seconds. The official story says Flight 77 was still something like 50, 70 miles away from Washington, D.C. when that happened. We're talking about massive inside the building explosions, pre-placed explosives, just like the World Trade Center. And this is the last slide that I'll include from my presentation at the Left Forum. And by the way, my and Professor Kevin Barrett's presentations this year at the Left Forum in New York City, which will be the 2nd to the 4th of June, one of those days. I don't know the precise date yet, but the Left Forum goes over 3 days, June 2nd through 4th. I believe that the title of our presentation, or the theme, is 9/11 Truth 101. So we're trying to educate people in the progressive movement. So this is the last slide from my presentation there last year in 2016. This is also a kind of 9/11 Truth Pentagon 101. And the reason is, I wish I had my pointer, but if you look in the middle of the screen, what you're looking at is a photograph. It's a composite photograph, but it's based upon actual photographs being put together like a panorama. And what you're looking at is a photograph of the west face of the Pentagon at precisely where the official story says a Boeing 757 going at about 550 miles an hour allegedly hit precisely on the second floor where that T is with the 2 dark windows on either side. Okay? It's impossible for that official story to be true. Why? Because if you notice, the vertical column is still in place, precisely where they claim a 757 going at 550 miles an hour hit the wall. It's impossible. Totally impossible. So as I mentioned, Professor Barrett and I will also be presenting at this year's Left Forum 2017, and it will be live streamed by noliesradio.org. And it will be audio archived, the video archived there as well, after the fact. I also want to raise to your attention an incredibly historic event that just happened a week ago, Saturday, I believe it was. Anyway, February 18th of this year, 2017. It was held in Detroit, Michigan. The speakers were Dr. Barrett, Dr. Kevin Barrett, Professor Kevin Barrett, Richard Gage, the founder and head of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and Christopher Bolin. Christopher Bolin, who has spoken in this area before. In our Monterey 9/11 Truth group, we've had all 3 of them come to speak, and as well here in Santa Cruz. I don't believe Christopher Bolin's been here. Maybe he has. Has he been here? Okay, great. Well, the 3 of them, if you can imagine, and each one of them, because they had a time constraint, and so they really, really, really got to the heart of everything. And you have got to see this. It was called The War on Islam, 9/11 Revisited, Uncovered, and Exposed. This is the link. And if you go to Professor Barrett's article here in Veterans Today, at the top is the video screen. Click on it and you'll see the whole 2 hours. It is 2 hours that every single person on the planet needs to see. There is no question. You cannot watch that and ever again believe that the official story of 9/11 is true. There has been a major 9/11 truth breakthrough. Now, Maureen asked me to cover this tonight. I did mention it after Professor Barrett spoke at the event here a few months ago, but I'm going to go into a little bit more detail now, and I've also got the slides. Now, I'm good with text, but I'm not really good with photographs, as you'll see. That's myself and former Senator Mike Gravel, who's a dear friend and colleague. And how many of you have heard about something called the 28 pages? Okay, not everybody. All right. Well, we've had a major breakthrough in the 9/11 truth movement, and it's really more than that. And it first had to do with something called the 28 pages. What were the 28 pages? The 28 pages were an entire chapter. Some reports said it was chapter 4. Others said it was the final chapter. Anyway, it was a full chapter, a standalone chapter, of the Joint House and Senate Intelligence Committee report on its investigation of the September 11th attacks, on the intelligence aspects of them. And most people mistakenly believe that the only official government investigation of 9/11, which was, of course, a cover-up, was the 9/11 Commission, but that's not correct. The first one was about 3 years before that. 2 years anyway, before that, and it was the Joint House-Senate Intelligence Committee investigation. And quite early in the spring, as I recall, of early 2002, they very quickly published their report. And the George W. Bush Cheney White House, according to what we were told by the House-Senate Intelligence Committee chairman, who were the main co-authors of the report, they told us that it was the George W. Bush Cheney White House that classified and hid away this one chapter, which was 28 pages long. So that chapter is the 28 pages. So we knew for over 15 years that these 28 pages had to be very important because they were hiding them away. They had something to hide. The 9/11 victims' family members, who are 9,000 husbands, wives, mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, or children of the almost 3,000 victims of the 9/11 attacks in New York, the Pentagon, and Pennsylvania, 9,000 9/11 victims' family members have been trying to sue the Saudi government for what they believe is their complicity in the attacks, because the official story claims that 15 of the 19 alleged, I underline alleged, we'll get to that, of the alleged 19 hijackers, 15 of them, according to the official lie anyway, were Saudis, the so-called muscle men, not the pilots, but the muscle men, right? Well, so the 9,000 9/11 victims' family members got the Motley Rice law firm to try to bring the Saudi government to court. And they tried to do that, and in order to do that, they wanted first to get the 28 pages declassified and released to the public so that they could use it in their court case with the jury and the judge. Okay. Well, 15 years went by, and they weren't successful. The Motley Rice law firm, one of the most powerful law firms in the country, and 9,000 9/11 victims' family members, with all of their clout, were not able to get the 28 pages released. Well, this infuriated me. It infuriated me. So I worked on it. And one morning, about 2 years ago, I woke up one morning with the answer. At least I thought it was the answer. And it came very clearly. We need to have a Mike Gravel for the 28 pages. What do I mean by that? If you recall, Mike Gravel read a good portion, not all, many people think all, but a portion of the famous Pentagon Papers into the congressional record on the Senate floor, and most of it actually in a Senate committee hearing room. But that was an official aspect of the Senate, and so it qualified for the congressional record. So even though it was a classified document, it had been leaked. He got a copy of it and he started reading it into the congressional record, and he got around the censorship of the classification that way by the Nixon White House and the Nixon Justice Department. Well, they tried to arrest him. They realized they couldn't do that. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and he won. It's a famous case called U.S. versus Gravel, and he won. And that case, you should read it. You should read it. It's online. maybe it's Gravel versus U.S., I believe. In Gravel versus U.S., believe it or not, the Supreme Court, in a decision I believe that was written by Scalia, of all people, as far right-wing in the court as you could get at the time, the decision in Gravel versus U.S. was that it doesn't even matter if it's classified information that has been illegally obtained, that the Constitution makes it explicit on its face that any speech by any member of the House or the Senate in any proceeding on the floor of the House or the Senate, any committee room, or any official, in any proceeding in any official capacity as a member of Congress, that speech is absolutely protected. They are 1,000% immune from any action by either the executive or the judicial branches. So they couldn't even be questioned about it. So this is U.S. versus Gravel, Gravel versus U.S. So I realized what we need is somebody to be the Mike Gravel who's already read the 28 pages, which a subset of members of the House and the Senate had read, not very many, but some, in the classified reading room in the House and the Senate. All they have to do is go on the floor of the House and the Senate and say what they remembered. The cat's out of the bag. But the person to get them, to convince them, to advocate to do this should be Mike Gravel. So I know Mike Gravel. So I decided, I woke up that morning, I said, I'm going to call Mike. Well, as fate would have it, I got a call that very morning, just as I was about to try to find Mike's number. I've been to his house up in Burlingame in the South San Francisco Bay Area. Just as I was about to do that, the phone rang, and it was Jane Clark, who is the president of the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Truth, which is the main Chinese activist organization committed to bringing the true 9/11 perpetrators to justice in courts of law, either international, U.S., or both, in the future. And so she called me, and I mentioned my ID to her, and she said, "Oh, we need to get Mick on the phone." I said, why? She said, well, Mick's our head of litigation, and I just feel that we should have a conference call with Mick. So Mick Harrison is the head of litigation for the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Truth. She gets him on, she calls me back. The three of us are on the phone. I tell them both my plan, that I'm going to drive up if necessary. I'm going to call or even drive up and see Mike, and I'm going to tell him that we need him to lobby members of the House and the Senate who have already read the 28 pages to say what they remember of the 28 pages on the floor of the House and the Senate, and let the cat out of the bag, and then there'd be no reason not to release the pages publicly. And so Mick said, no, Barb, stop. You're not a member of the House and the Senate, and you could be put in prison, he thought. You might be put in prison, or somebody might try to put you in prison, and Mike might try to put Mike Gravel in prison, because he's no longer in the Senate. Neither of you are in the Congress. And you would be advocating for breaking the law, even though I disagreed with him because of the constitutional protection. He said, let's just be safe. This is what I'll do. This is Mick Harrison, the head of litigation for Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Truth. He said, Barb, this is what I'll do. I will study, and I'll do it quickly, I will study Gravel versus U.S., and I will write a law review article draft. Oh. And that law review article draft, you are perfectly within your right under free speech, especially the protection of political speech, for you and or Mike to go to these members, sitting members of the House and the Senate, and just say, you should read this. And it in the text will tell them what they need to do. So that's what he did. That's what he did. And in the process of working with him, I did the deep editing on this. I meant to have the link to that here, but if you ask me for it, I will send it to you. I will send you by email this incredible law review article. Our own Danny Sheehan reviewed that law review article and was part of the editorial loop also. This is a very historical document because I personally took it to Mike Gravel as soon as it was finished, and he was flabbergasted. He had no idea what he had done because there were at least a dozen Supreme Court and lower court decisions that cited his Gravel versus U.S. subsequently absolutely continuing to say that the protection for all speech, even revealing classified information by a member of the House or the Senate, is absolute. So that would cover the 28 pages. Well, the bottom line is, this was at the 9/11 Truth Conference in New York City, where Mike was, and I went up to him, and this photograph, which was taken by No Lies Radio, by the way, by their photographer. Sorry it's cut off, but I can show you the actual photograph here afterwards if you'd like. It's a nice photograph. This photograph happened to be taken literally like 30 seconds after I tapped him on the shoulder. It was during a lunch break at our big 9/11 Truth Convention in New York City, September of 2015. I tapped him on the shoulder, big round table where about 12 people were sitting. I said, "Mike." And he said, "Barb." And I said, "Mike, I need to talk to you, and I need to talk to you now." And we're sitting in 2 chairs off to the side. And I had just about this far from his face said, "Mike, your country needs you. We need a Mike Gravel for the 28 pages. And I was about to tell him what I meant by that. And I will never forget this moment. The tears came to my eyes as he responded to me. He said, "Barb, I know what you're going to say. I'll do it. I'm an old man. This is the most important thing I can do. I will do it." Well, then I told him what I had in mind, but he'd basically gotten the idea. He's very, very smart. So once he got Mick Harrison's incredible law review article, he personally flew to Washington, D.C., and went into the offices of the members of the House and the Senate. And he educated them with that law review article and his convincing, his advocacy. He got them to put a cocked gun to the head of the Obama White House, which, like President George W. Bush, had refused to release it. And the cocked gun, the other part that we were able to cock the gun with was, believe it or not, we found that there was a CIA letterhead letter on the CIA's legal department stating that it was that the 28 pages and the entire House Senate Intelligence Committee report on 9/11, of which the 28 pages were a part, that it was a congressional document and that the White House, the executive branch, had no business classifying it anyway.
Fantastic.
No.
Okay, so this is the moment where just after 30 seconds after he said, "Barb, I'll do it. I'm an old man. It's the most important thing I can do for the rest of my life." And he did. So it worked. The 28 pages were very quickly released because the most important person was Rand Paul, Senator Rand Paul. There were a series of press conferences in Washington, D.C., and when Senator Rand Paul came on board, at the beginning it was the members of the House who had received the law review article and understood that they were completely protected, that there was nothing the White House could do if they just spilled the beans on the floor of the House. But it was when Senator Rand Paul and 2 other senators, Kirsten Gillibrand and Ron Wyden, those 3 senators were really the turning point in my mind. And it was Rand Paul, Senator Rand Paul, in one of those press conferences, he actually said in response to a question from the audience from one of our 9/11 Truth people, Barry Kissin, who's an attorney in the Washington, D.C. area. Barry Kissin asked a question, and this is also on YouTube, you can see this. Barry Kissin asked a question after the press conference. He said, well, words to the effect, are you aware that you can spill the beans anyway? You know, U.S. versus Gravel. And Rand Paul said publicly, he said, we're fully aware of our authority, but we're not going to go there unless we have to. But that was enough to let the White House know that the game was up, okay? So it was a congressional document all along, and we had the law review article and we had the CIA letterhead legal document saying it was a congressional document to begin with, and they had the ability and the authority to release it all along. And they did. It was the Congress that released the 28 pages, not the White House. So what about these what do these 28 pages, what did they reveal and why were they being kept secret? Well, you've probably heard the mainstream media citing the Saudi government after the 28 pages were released. What was that, about a year ago now? The Saudi government said, oh, there's nothing in it. The 28 pages prove that we had nothing to do with 9/11. Exactly the opposite. Exactly the opposite. Here's Saudi Prince Bandar Bush. He's so close to George W. Bush and the Bush family that they called him Bandar Bush, like one of the sons of the family, like an honorary son. Prince Bandar Bush of Saudi Arabia is referenced 17 times, just in these 28 pages, with direct links to Abu Zubaydah's phone book. Abu Zubaydah was the first so-called terrorist who was arrested in Pakistan, detained in Pakistan and brought to Guantanamo. I believe he's still there, actually. This is Prince Bandar Bush, President Bush, Vice President Cheney, and National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice on the White House balcony 2 days after the 9/11 attacks, celebrating with cigars. Prince Bandar Bush of Saudi Arabia is just one of 22 top Saudi officials in the 28 pages. And they happen to be linked, guess what, to only 2 of the alleged 19 hijackers. And both of them happen to be on just one of the 4 planes, the Pentagon plane. So that kind of fell into my lap because I'm one of really the foremost expert on the Pentagon attack on 9/11. So this is a kind of link diagram showing you Prince Bandar Sultan's, that's Prince Bandar Bush's links to the important other top Saudi officials who are in the 28 pages, and in turn to these over on the right, the 2 alleged Pentagon plane hijackers, okay? But if we can prove that there weren't any hijackers at all on the Pentagon plane, well, that claim goes out the window, doesn't it? And there is compelling evidence that there were no hijackers on the Pentagon plane, and that even if there were, that the plane that approached the Pentagon at almost 9:38, after all the bombs had been going off since 9:30, couldn't have been Flight 77 in any case. These are just tips of the iceberg. You'll see everything in Behind the Smoke Curtain, and the DVD is in the back of the room. There was no Arab DNA, and this is in the Pentagon's own autopsy report. No Arab DNA, no Semitic DNA of any kind amongst the remains of the Pentagon victims. None. Dulles Airport, this is a still frame from a screen capture from the Dulles Airport alleged security camera video that shows the alleged hijackers going through security that morning. It has the wrong number of frames per second.
What does that tell you, Barb?
It cannot be from that morning, and it cannot be from an actual security camera. There is also no date and time stamp on it. It is a fake video. It has nothing to do with the morning of 9/11. Here's another example of how we know it couldn't. This is one of the main reasons we know it couldn't have been Flight 77 anyway. It turns out that the official story says that Flight 77 left Dulles Airport outside of D.C., Chantilly, Virginia area at 8:20 in the morning, 8:21, that it went west, that was heading towards California, that it went west, that it then turned around and came back and struck the Pentagon at 9:37 and 46 seconds. The problem with that is that as this plane, whatever plane left, and was probably Flight 77, left Dulles Airport in the morning, before it even turned around, it was seen by FAA Indianapolis Air Traffic Control and officially reported as having already started to descend before the turn, before it would have turned, and to have descended at least 6,000 feet while its transponder was still on before the transponder went off. But the radar, and the official story radar, which can't be real from that plane, doesn't have the plane, whatever it is, in the radar, starting to descend until way after the turn back east. And because the same physical plane can't do both, whatever plane is going back east cannot have been the one that left Dulles Airport. So it couldn't have, if it was Flight 77 that left Dulles Airport, it couldn't have been Flight 77 that approached the Pentagon at the official story alleged impact time. Impossible. The release of the 28 pages in turn, and this is the true breakthrough for 9/11 Truth and a lot more, It's a true revolution in international law, in fact. The release of the 28 pages in turn led almost immediately to the passage of JASTA, the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, which unbelievably, this is a miracle, during this extremely divisive period of time in Washington, D.C., Obama was still in office. It passed the House and the Senate unanimously. How many things have ever passed the House and the Senate unanimously even before Obama? Going way back. It passed both houses unanimously. Then Obama vetoed it. Obama took the side of the Saudi government against 9,000 9/11 victims' family members who are trying to get justice for their deceased loved ones, for their mass murdered loved ones. Took the side of Saudi Arabia, okay, for so-called national security reasons, the same excuse they gave for classifying and hiding away the 28 pages to begin with. So Obama vetoes the bill, and immediately the House and the Senate override his veto almost unanimously. I think it was 97-3 in the Senate, and it was maybe 60 against and 390, something like that. It was almost close to unanimous. It was a great majority in the House of Representatives, and for the first time in almost 8 years, overrode for the first time one of Obama's vetoes. So this was the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act. And the amazing thing about JASTA, this Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, which is now the law of the United States, is that it allows any American citizen or group of citizens who have credible evidence that they have been attacked by a foreign terrorist on United States soil. You have to be a citizen. They are allowed to pierce the sovereign immunity of that foreign power and sue in a U.S. civil court against that foreign power. Now, the 9/11 victims' family members, whose lawsuit is now allowed to move forward because JASTA passed, they are suing the Saudi government. But you can use it to sue the Israelis, the Germans, the Russians, doesn't matter. So this is the commentary by so-called legal experts after JASTA passed. They thought that the world was going to end because they called it shaking the foundation of international law. And we achieved that. We achieved that. So this is the alleged Pentagon plane hijacker, one of those two alleged hijackers of the Pentagon plane that are mentioned in the 28 pages that are now released that led to the passage of JASTA. His name is Al-Midar. Guess what? He's one of the at least 6 and as many as 10 alleged hijackers who are still alive after 9/11, alive and well in Saudi Arabia. So what would happen, just imagine, if this suit by the 9/11 victims' family members moves forward? What's going to happen when Saudi Arabia defends itself and brings these still alive hijackers into the courtroom? That would be the ultimate Perry Mason moment, right? Yeah, because the official story about these hijackers is a complete fraud. Nevertheless, it's the official story, so that's why the 9/11 victims' family members are trying to move forward with their case. So what is the goal? Now we're going to talk briefly about what our 9/11 Truth Movement is doing to bring the real perpetrators to justice, and here are the real perpetrators. So what is our goal? Our goal is to identify, expose, and bring the real perpetrators to justice. And there they are. So we have George W. Bush on the left, on the top. Then we have Dick Cheney. And then we have Donald Rumsfeld. I'm not sure who's on the lower left. Then we have Condoleezza Rice. And we have Paul Wolfowitz. And we have Richard Pearl. Self-proclaimed Prince of Darkness, by the way, on the lower left, the lower right. So the 9/11 Truth Movement has a two-pronged legal strategy. Legal action to identify, expose, and bring the real perpetrators to justice in both international tribunals as well as the United States. It's probably not going to happen in the United States, even under Trump, even though he deemed himself a 9/11 truther and actually has spoken a lot of 9/11 truth before the before the election, but I don't think there's any chance with his being close to the Orthodox right wing in Israel, the Likudist faction. I don't think there's any chance because the Israelis are absolutely masterminds of the 9/11 attacks. So I don't think there's any chance of that. But anyway, our goal is legal action in international tribunals and/or domestic U.S. courts to bring the real perpetrators to justice, and simultaneous public education campaign. So what have we been able to achieve so far? This is a photograph of myself with the former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Italy, Judge Ferdinando Impazamato. He's a magnificent man. He's written a number of books on 9/11, making it very clear, as Professor Kevin Barrett said in his presentation here in Santa Cruz a few months ago, that the 9/11 attacks were an American Gladio attack. That is the focus and main claim that he proves in his books, which are unfortunately not yet translated into English, but we're working on that. 3 books on that. This is a photograph of the two of us at the May 9/11 conference. It was a legal symposium held in New York City for our main 2016 anniversary conference, and it was sponsored by 9/11justiceinfocus.org, which is the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. And I mentioned the president is Jane Clark, and the head of litigation is Mick Harrison, Esquire, who did this wonderful law review article based upon Gravel versus U.S. that I mentioned before, that was instrumental in getting the 28 pages declassified and released, and JASTA passed into law. So at this conference, the keynote speakers, which I personally arranged and paid for Judge Impazamato to come to this country so he could talk, were Judge Ferdinando Impazamato, the former Chief Justice of Italy's Supreme Court, and the current President of Italy's Supreme Court, and our own Daniel Sheehan of Santa Cruz. And you can go online to 911justiceinfocus.org, and you can see all of those, the videos of all of those presentations. And for our public education campaign, this is just at the Women's March, the day after the inauguration of Trump in Washington, D.C. That's the JASTA banner at the Women's March, held by, on the right is Les Jameson, who is the founder and president, the head of 9/11 Truth New York City. And I'm not sure who the gentleman is on the left, but I'm sure he's 9/11 Truth New York City as well. Protect JASTA, it's the law. The reason that they have this banner at the Women's March in D.C. just recently is because the Saudi government has now paid for 10 top D.C. lobbying corporations to put out propaganda to try to get JASTA overturned or at least watered down in the new Congress. And so far that has not happened. So it's important to go to this website, www.hr14.org. That's the website about that gives you letters that you can easily email to your senators and member of Congress, your representative in the House of Representatives, to insist that they do not water down or overturn JASTA. It's extremely important. Now, there's the last portion of my presentation. I can either stop now, or I can give this to you. It's entirely different. It's on the legal aspect of what I learned in the White House about the radical right's secret plan to destroy everything we stand for. I know that we've been talking for a while. Do you want me to go forward?
Please.
Okay. All right. So there is a secret plan to destroy absolutely everything that the progressive movement in this country stands for. Everything. From the Civil War and the 14th Amendment on. And how do I know this? I know because I was there. I was there when this secret plan that they are planning to enact, when they have all the levers of power, and they're about to control the Supreme Court again, as well as both houses of Congress and the White House and the executive branch. I was there when this plan was being hatched. They tried to effect it during the Reagan administration, but did not succeed. And they've been waiting in the wings for this moment. So I was there. And this is proof that I was there. This is the White House Cabinet Room in 1981. I was a policy analyst in the West Wing of the Reagan-Bush Sr. White House. And just for those of you who don't know, so that you won't throw tomatoes at me, I was also the first public resignation of conscience from the Reagan White House and Justice Department to about 10 days of national and international publicity, where I exposed their secret plan for their war on women. That was the reason that I resigned. Most people think it was about October surprise, but that was quite a few years later. So, as context, we're talking about the Trump administration now and these radical right-wing legal strategists behind, who are now in the Trump administration and advising him. So if you are against, as they are, women's rights, minorities' rights, LGBT rights, Muslim rights, voting rights, what are you against? You're against equal rights. Well, so far, equal rights have been guaranteed. Our bottom line guarantee of equal rights is the 14th Amendment, which was the legal fruit of the Civil War and all of those massive numbers of deaths, which the South lost, we think. But if you are a white supremacist and you want to overturn all equal rights, you want to return to basically propertied white male, rich propertied white males running everything, officially, not just through corporate CEOships and big billionaires, but officially, you know, on the surface of things, not just the reality, the deep reality. So if you're a white supremacist and you want to overturn equal rights, officially, what do you attack? You attack the heart of the guarantee, which is the 14th Amendment. And you make your symbol the Confederate flag. Did you know that European populists and nativists are now using the U.S. Confederate flag as their symbol in Europe? That's been in the New York Times, the Washington Post. San Francisco Chronicle front page headline, right after the election. This nation has never been so divided, except you have to go back to the Civil War. We're in a very dangerous time. So, what do we do about it? First, we have to know our enemy. Well, you're lucky, because through a fluke of history, I was like your eyes and ears inside the Reagan-Bush Sr. White House and Justice Department at the time that the plot, the secret plan that they are planning to put into place soon, was being hatched. They assumed I was one of them, and I wasn't. Believe it or not, Bannon, now we're going to link, what we're now going to do is we're going to link this secret plan back to the Reagan administration that they're now going to try to put into effect. So Steve Bannon, this white nationalist, basically neo-Nazi in my opinion, chief strategist inside the Trump White House, Steve Bannon and Trump's hero was who? Believe it or not, Ronald Reagan. So this article, which is a must-read, combative populist Steve Bannon finds his man in Trump. What the article makes clear, by his man, ever since the two Reagan terms, 1981 to 1989, Steve Bannon has been looking for the right man to take the mantle of Ronald Reagan. And he believes that is Donald Trump. So that's what that article is about, and it's frightening. And then just in yesterday's New York Times, what does Steve Bannon want? I highly recommend that you read that article as well. Well, does this so-called Trump slogan, "Let's make America great again," does that ring a bell? That was the Reagan-Bush Sr. campaign slogan in 1980. That was the campaign I was at the top of. And here's Trump and Reagan at the White House. This is, I know where this is. This is in the foyer, in the main part of the building, which is the residence, and then the West Wing and the East Wing are the small wings off to the side. And this is the main foyer lobby, where there was some kind of a reception that Trump was at with Reagan. And from Reagan's appearance, this was very early in his first term when I was there. As I mentioned, I was the first public resignation of conscience from the Reagan-Bush administration, White House and Justice Department. I resigned on national television. It was either the Today Show or Good Morning America, the day after publishing the longest fact-based opinion piece ever published in the Washington Post. Took up a full page in small print. I resigned on national television to 10 days of national and international publicity, and my post-expose has been republished in Historic Documents of 1982 by Congressional Quarterly. So I mention that so that you know I was actually there. I was at a very high level in the Reagan-Bush senior campaign, in the transition at the top floor, and in the West Wing of the White House, right over the Oval Office. How I learned about this radical right-wing plan for the Supreme Court, which we're going to get into. I was the top aide in the White House to this man. His name was Dr. Martin Anderson. He died recently, unfortunately. He was at the Hoover Institution, where I was a research associate working for him while I was putting myself through graduate school in the neuropsychology of human and non-human primate communication at Stanford. It was just a job, but as it turned out, while I was in that job, simply earning money to put myself through graduate school, Dr. Anderson got tapped by Ronald Reagan, who had just been made a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford, to become an honorary fellow. Ronald Reagan had just become an honorary fellow at the Hoover Institution, came into our office one day and asked Marty, my boss, Dr. Martin Anderson, if he would be his chief domestic policy advisor in the campaign in 1980. Marty said yes, and I go off with coattails to the very top of the Reagan campaign headquarters in Arlington, Virginia. But Dr. Anderson, and this is how we know what their secret plan is, Dr. Anderson, in turn, his boss was this man. At the time he was White House counsel, at the time this photograph was taken, Ed Meese was White House counsel to Reagan, and later in the second term he became Attorney General to Reagan. And during the campaign, he was my boss's boss. So it went Meese, Dr. Martin Anderson, myself in the campaign and the transition. So Ed Meese, well, he's come around again in the Trump campaign and the transition. So Mr. Ed Meese, a key member of Trump's transition team, along with many others from the truly radical states' rights, constitutional originalist, Heritage Foundation and Federalist Society, of which Meese is the spider in the middle of this web. Mises Federalist Society and Heritage Foundation literally created the list of 21 federal judge candidates that Trump promised publicly only to choose from for any Supreme Court nominee and any other judgeship. And Judge Gorsuch, who is his nominee, his current nominee for Supreme Court, is from that list of 21. That is Ed Meese's list. Here is Ed Meese with, guess who? Director Comey. Ed Meese on the left, Director Comey there, and in the background is one of the members of the 9/11 Commission. So Mr. Meese and Mr. Comey are like this. And Mr. Comey is probably more than anyone else, except the Russians, responsible for Trump's surprise victory in the election. Now, we assume that Supreme Court rulings will protect us, and that Supreme Court rulings will be based upon the guarantees of the 14th Amendment. However, under their plan, you can no longer count on that. Meese, the Federalist Society, and the Heritage Foundation hate the 14th Amendment. They want to go back before the Civil War. They want to figure out a way to get around the protections of the 14th Amendment. So the way they do this is they say, we want to pick candidates for the Supreme Court and the lower courts who are so-called originalists, who want to go back to the original intent of the Founding Fathers. Well, think about it. It's 1789. A lot's happened since then. So there are two warring camps in legal interpretation. One of them is the originalist camp, which is the Ed Meese camp, and this radical right-wing states' rights originalist camp, and the other is the living Constitution, which, thank God, the swing judge on the court, Kennedy, favors so far. Anyway, so they want to go back to before the Civil War, to the Founding Fathers' original intent, through a radical originalist interpretation or reinterpretation of the Constitution, where so-called states' rights, don't forget, slavery was, the Grand Compromise, that was states' rights, right? The southern states could keep their slavery under the rubric of radical states' rights, where states' rights, like the original Grand Compromise on slavery, would rule, would trump, and I mean that in the sense of trump individual rights. And everything that we stand for, that the progressive movement stands for, is increasing the inclusion of individual rights for every single person, certainly every single citizen of the United States. They don't want that. They want to return to rich, propertied white males. The perfect example is slavery, which is forced labor, and I'm going to get to that because it's the issue over which I resigned publicly from the Reagan-Bush Sr. White House and Justice Department. If you think about it, forced pregnancy and childbirth is literally forced labor. Forgive the pun, but it's literal. So what is the secret plan for, believe it or not, overturning all of this? Ed Meese gave a keynote address to the American Bar Association in the 1980s. I was there. It shocked me. You can read the address online. His goal, their goal, is to attack Marbury versus Madison. Now, I don't know if you know anything about Supreme Court decisions, but Marbury versus Madison, if you go to law school, and I recommend going on YouTube and clicking on Marbury versus Madison for Dummies. It's a really great introduction to Marbury versus Madison, and what you learn, and I already knew, is that this extremely famous and critical Supreme Court decision, Supreme Court case or ruling, is the first one that is taught to law students in almost every law school. And the reason for that is the Marbury versus Madison decision is the very foundation of the Supreme Court's claim to be able to rule unconstitutional laws void, and, most people don't know, to rule unconstitutional executive actions and omissions unconstitutional, and therefore make them null and void. So this is the essence and the foundation of the power of judicial review, of the power of the courts, okay, of that independent branch of our federal government. Their secret plan is to get enough justices who are so-called originalists prior, you go back to 1789, and the founding of our Constitution, that's before Marbury versus Madison, they want to overrule Marbury versus Madison and to have the Supreme Court say, we don't have the power anymore. We don't have the jurisdiction anymore to say that anything Mr. Trump does is unconstitutional. We don't have the power anymore to say anything that the Republican right-wing, radical right-wing controlled Congress does is unconstitutional and therefore null and void. They want to, like Atlas Shrugged. Okay, that's the plan. So, overruling Marbury versus Madison and getting around the 14th Amendment, which came after the originalist 1789, is the goal, the life goal of this man, Ed Meese, under whom I worked at the Reagan campaign, transition, and White House. The coming assault, the plan for a coming assault on all individual rights justified by this radical constitutional reinterpretation of so-called states' rights and religious freedom. They want religious freedom to trump individual rights. And I mentioned already Meese's shocking American Bar Association keynote speech on this agenda. He was upfront about it. Now, believe it or not, I have, because I was there at the time on the inside, I actually have the text, his original text, because I was working in his department in the White House. I have the original text and Justice Department. I have the original text of his proposed speech. He left out 2 critical paragraphs when he gave it because they were a little too shocking. Okay. But that speech shocked the entire progressive legal community across the country. So I think I'm going to skip this. You can ask me about it in a question. It's going to take us a little bit off. What?
Good Lord, I say.
How to defeat the radical plan to force pregnancy and childbirth on American women. Roe versus Wade was based on a right to privacy. That is too weak a basis in a post-9/11 mass surveillance world where privacy doesn't exist anymore. So what's needed is a radical reframing of the entire so-called abortion issue. I know how to do that. And I'm just going to refer you to this. Listen to this. It was my interview with Bonnie Faulkner on Guns and Butter. It's one of the most popular programs, most listened to programs on her audio archives on her website, Guns and Butter website. We the Men versus We the People, reframing the abortion issue. It will shock you, but you will also see how it can be done. Now we're almost to the end of my presentation. There is a very real threat of the radical right wing holding an Article 5 convention. Does anybody know what an Article 5 convention is? 2 or 3 people. Well, you better read your Constitution and you better read it fast. The Constitution refers to an Article 5 convention. And in order to trigger an Article 5 convention under which you can completely, you can throw into the garbage can the entire U.S. Constitution. You can rewrite it. Instead of amendment by amendment, if you have an Article 5 convention, you can rewrite the whole thing. In order to do so, you have to have 2/3 of the state legislatures. They have them now. And the Constitution makes it clear that all they have to do is demand that Article 5 convention, and they have to be given it. And all they have to do is get one more person in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will uphold their demand for the Article 5 convention. So we must preempt this. And I know how to preempt it. The way we preempt it is to hold a progressive side pre-Article 5 convention, in which we come up in a deliberative process. We could do it in this building, in a truly deliberative process like our founding fathers did. We come up with a platform. Political parties have platforms, but they're thrown in the wastebasket once somebody gets in power, when somebody wins an election. But we could have a very serious political platform that is composed of proposed constitutional amendments. And these amendments would be our progressive side, constitutional amendments, to fix our nation. And we need to hold that, and we need to be serious about it, and we need to publicize it widely. And then I believe that one of the vehicles to bring it into the political process as early as this coming election, by election season 2018, there's a subset of the Bernie Sanders supporters in this last presidential election, and I ran for Congress as a Bernie Sanders independent in our congressional district. I should have won, by the way. Next time I'm going to run again, so if you want any of this to happen, vote for me. Okay. Bernie Sanders, a subgroup of the Bernie Sanders supporters have founded a new organization called Brand New Congress, or BNC. I think it's bnc.org. I highly recommend you go there. They have a brilliant strategy for taking over Congress. They probably won't do it as soon as 2018, but if they follow their plan, they probably will. And I believe that we can piggyback, as it were, this progressive pre-Article 5 convention onto the Brand New Congress movement. It's also critically important that we take back our national patriotic symbols for the progressive side of politics. An example is the Bill of Rights flag. I actually created the first Bill of Rights flag, where the Bill of Rights are on the stripes of the American flag. And as soon as I get the money, I intend to make thousands and thousands of them. And we need to be having those flags. We need, instead of the flag to represent this patriotic nonsense and wars and blood and killing, we need to have the flag identified in the minds and hearts of every single American and everyone in the world with our Constitution. I want you to know the truth about September 11th. To be won, this battle that we're talking about here must be waged to be won. The New York Times, this is a chilling quote. Donald Trump is a fraud and a dangerous one. This country is depending on morally principled patriots, that's you and me, to never let that fact be shifted from center stage. Now each of us must demonstrate our fortitude in vocal, steadfast resistance and more. Not every battle can be won, but every battle ahead of us must be waged. This is the proving ground. Thank you. Okay, we could have questions and answers if you'd like. And then just a sec. Do we have a mic for questions?
The mic is over there to your left, Barbara.
To my left. Oh, here. Yeah, okay. And if you could keep your questions and comments short.
Of course. Barbara, I'm Terry Maxwell, as you know. We've known each other for a number of years and places. I am very disappointed, first, that you were not elected to Congress, that Jim Webb or Elizabeth Warren were not elected president as well. I wish you every success, and I'll be somehow available to help you next time.
Okay.
More significantly, Trump has gained ground, in my view, because the Democrats and Obama were worse than mistakes. They failed to perform their sworn duties as well.
They're great disappointments.
And you drive through Pennsylvania, for example, and you see city after city with shut down factories and factory business names that under trade deals the Clintons primarily agreed to, sent those jobs to enrich, again, the Wall Street banksters as shareholders and the management, moving that economic wealth and those jobs to China and elsewhere.
Got a question?
My question is, and likewise, people are tired of foreign immigrants being thrust on to the limited resources like Lewiston, Maine, of their county resources and dozens of others. And Trump and that group have played on that fear, anxiety, so effectively. I think unless, from my view, the Democrats become balanced about immigration enforcement and regulation and vetting, you'll never overcome that 35–40% that remain frightened of it.
Right. I don't know if I made this explicit, but it was one of my slides. In my opinion, it's an educated opinion, Trump would not have won if it hadn't have been for the 9/11 lie, because he was able to conflate immigration with the fear of terrorism. This is a false conflation. Okay, so that's the fundamental reason that the 9/11 truth movement is so critically important. But it's also very clear to me that Trump also won because people know that people just sensed, and I have to tell you I did as well, even though I would never vote for him because I know who he is, that he's a potential Adolf Hitler, seriously. But people just knew in their gut that this probably they felt was their last chance to stop the globalization movement. And that's what Obama is, it's what Hillary is, it's what the Bushes are. It's what the globalists are. And they're transnationalist corporate globalists. They don't have any loyalty to country. They don't want sovereignty. So this is a backlash. And I'm also convinced that Trump wouldn't have won if Brexit hadn't happened. So there's an international movement against globalism. And, it started in Seattle, didn't it? It started with that incredible protest movement in Seattle. So now we have a president of the United States. It's clear why Trump won, but that doesn't mean that he's better. I think he's more dangerous, but I understand why he won.
First, I just want to thank you for putting all of this together, especially the first part, putting Trump together with the Hitler threat, because I have been putting this all together for months, if not years, and going, why doesn't anybody else believe this?
Right.
It's so obvious.
They try to say, oh, it's not really Trump. It's really just Bannon. He's really just placating these people. He's not really one of them. No, he's one of them.
And he's one of them.
He's one of them.
Drumpf is his name, as you know.
Drumpf, yes. His real name wasn't even Trump. It was Drumpf.
D-R-U-M-P-F.
P.F.
How I refer to
Can you imagine Drumpf Tower? I mean, it just doesn't work.
So what I wanted to mention is, I don't know whether everybody is aware that today is the anniversary of the Reichstag fire. 84 years ago today.
Really?
Yes. And
Which is February 27th.
February 27th.
What was the year?
1933.
1933.
And 2 days after that fire, the fire was in the central court part of the Reichstag, which is the parliament in Germany. And theoretically, an Oswald-type guy lit the tapestries and caused it, and he was a communist.
He was set up.
And that gave Hitler was already chancellor. And within 2 days, Hindenburg, the president, signed a super extreme Patriot Act.
Yeah, the Enabling Act.
Took all of the rights away from people. And then within 2 weeks, the parliament gave Hitler all the rest of the power and took all power away from themselves.
Right.
So, 9/11 was kind of our first Reichstag fire, and we can expect another one.
Well, that's a very good point. In my Behind the Smoke Curtain, I explicitly identify or parallel the 9/11 attacks with the Reichstag fire because it was a self-attack. Okay, it was an inside job, self-attack, no question about it. But I did want to make explicit, and I didn't in my talk so far, but thank you for bringing it up, that the real danger of Donald Trump is that he could seriously, he is seriously in danger of being impeached, even by it would have to be by his own party. Under the 25th Amendment, which enables him to be removed from office or impeached, there are 2 ways you can get rid of a president, more and more people are seeing that he is actually mentally unhinged and that this is extremely dangerous for the entire world, not just the United States. So what's really a danger is that as it becomes clearer and clearer that he's in danger of being removed, the only way he can stay in power is another 9/11. Is another Reichstag fire. Yeah, that's the real danger that we have ahead of us, and the real reason that the 9/11 Truth Movement is so critical, especially at this time. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, I don't know if Trump has enough connection, with the inner circles in Washington, D.C. to do anything like that, because he's an outsider.
To do anything like what?
Well, for instance, like the 911.
Oh, he doesn't have to be responsible for it. He'll just be the beneficiary.
I agree with you regarding both sides being responsible for trying to take away the sovereignty of our nation.
Yeah, both parties.
I'm not a world globalist
No.
at all. I really appreciate
both parties are responsible.
That's what I like about you.
Yeah.
I really do. I like that side of you, because Trump and Bernie Sanders, I don't know if he'd be strong enough either, but you know what? Something needs to change.
Yeah.
And it's neither party, but we need to start with I believe, don't you agree? Because this is what I've talked to you about, is starting with our local community and then going out. It's not federal in, it's a local community out.
Well, the beauty of this concept of having a platform of proposed constitutional amendments is you create that in pre-Article 5 conventions across the country locally, and then you merge them in a national movement, and it goes straight to the very top of our federal system by changing the Constitution.
Okay, why would you want to change I think the Constitution's a good essential check and balance system, but as far as, of course, slavery, to me, of course, that's not wonderful at all, but also the equal rights as far as everybody, should be maintained as 14th Amendment.
Well, of course it should be maintained, but believe me, they have a plan to undo it all.
But for the last 8 years, race issues have gotten worse than they have been in decades and decades and decades.
Right, because the progressive side has become complacent. We had a black president, and they thought, oh, we won. Well, they were wrong.
Thank you.
They were wrong.
Thank you so much, Barbara.
So I have 3 quick questions. One, are you aware of Paul Stuckey of Peter Paul and Mary's latest song?
No. Are you going to sing it for us?
Oh, the first line, Impeachable.
Oh, no.
That's what you are. You can YouTube it. Just
Very
YouTube
good. You've got a
impeachable.
great
Pop-
voice.
And it ends with, someday Mike Pence may be impeachable too. That's a great song. Okay.
That's great.
Secondly, you're aware of Greg Palast's work?
Yes.
That isn't being mentioned much. Yet I haven't seen it much. But it
Right.
seems to be fairly conclusive evidence of all those votes stolen. There's been a lot focus on Russia, but not on Greg's work. Everybody know what
Right.
we're talking about?
Right. Well, look, October Surprise was about my book, October Surprise, which has now been proven by a deathbed confession of the top felon, Iran-Contra felon, Dwayne Dewey Claridge, who had to be pardoned by George Bush Sr. as one of his last acts as president because he was already convicted as a felon for it. My book, October Surprise, is about this, basically the treasonous theft or fraudulent influence of the 1980 election. But the Republicans routinely steal elections or fraudulently influence them. They did in 1963, they did in 1972, they did in 1980 in the October Surprise with Iran, with the Khomeini regime in Iran. They did in 2000, they stole the election in Florida. They did in 2004, they stole the election in Ohio. And then they just did it again in collusion with the Russians. The Republicans routinely, they are a minority and they can't win legitimately. So they just steal them.
That's right. The last question has to do with something you mentioned before. When I saw Trump saying, everyone who, what was it, I think is not going along with my plans for immigration will be responsible for the next
9/11, basically.
9/11.
Yeah.
I thought, oh boy.
They're planning it.
So they're planning it. They're planning it.
They're planning it.
So do you have any idea of what we can do to alert people that this is in the works and that we might respond differently than we did to the original 9/11?
Well, the importance, I think I mentioned in one of my slides, everybody really needs to see this event, the War on Islam. Which was Richard Gage, Professor Kevin Barrett, and Christopher Bolin just a week ago Saturday. You really need to see that. And it's about 2 hours. And when you see that, especially Dr. Barrett's work is so critical because by making public the fact that the United States government, and this is Democrats as well as Republicans when they're in power, they routinely go to war based upon false flags. 9/11 was the, as Kevin says, Professor Barrett says, the mother of all false flags. Okay, so there, you know that they have in the works another even greater mother of all false flags. Now, this would be by a faction who want Trump to stay in power. Okay, it doesn't mean that Trump himself would be personally behind it, but he would be the beneficiary. He and his people would be, and this secret plan would be the beneficiary. So exposing false flags, educating the American public that every single time we've gone to war, it's been based upon lies and false flags. It's very important. And Kevin's talk in this event a week ago Saturday, it was brilliant because it goes right back to Nero and burning Rome himself to blame it on the Christians who were gaining too much power. He goes all the way back, whereas his presentation here in Santa Cruz was just about the most recent U.S. false flags. So it's very, very important to see. I would send that link to as many people as you know in positions of authority.
Impeachable.
Impeachable. Anybody else? Okay.
Yes. What would your opinion be on the difference between the radical Republicans who created the 14th Amendment and the radical right now?
What do you mean the radical Republicans who recreated it? What do you mean?
I mean the radical Republicans were the ones that...
Won the Civil War?
Back when the Republicans were the good guys.
I don't understand what you mean yet.
Signed the 14th Amendment.
Well, I don't think that's radical.
Okay.
The radical Republicans were those who took over the Confederate state governments.
Right.
That's and pillaged. Those were the radical who inflicted the damage on the South after the Civil War.
Well, they're trying to fight back. You know, they simply will not accept defeat, and they've popped back. You know, they have to be defeated again. That's all I'll say.
So the opinion is the radical Republicans did not initiate the 14th Amendment?
I really don't understand your question, or I don't have the historical background to answer it. But, I mean, educate me.
Yeah, well-
I mean, I just don't think that radicals created the 14th Amendment.
The term radical misunderstood
Yeah.
from the ninth grade, learning about the post-Civil War history. Different radicals.
Well, radical for their time, but not for our time. Yeah.
Different term.
Yeah.
But the modern radical that Barbara's referring to is the Trumps and the Bannons and so forth.
People who want to go back literally to the originalists, to 1789, and only that American citizens will only have the rights that you had or didn't have, white propertied rich males, in 1789.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, any other? Okay, thank you so much for coming. Oh, I do want to say one more thing. Up on the screen, this is very important for everybody to see. This is my most recent creation or project. It's recently on YouTube. It's only 28 minutes. It's a must-hear 28 minutes. So it's audio only with photographs on the screen because it was a radio interview. But it's with a very, very critical whistleblower named Greg Ford. Francis Gregory Ford. Frank Gregory Ford. He's known as Greg Ford. Greg Ford is maybe the most important whistleblower that you can hear. He was the only military medic for his intelligence group at Abu Ghraib prison. He was the whistleblower who turned in his military chain of command for violating the Geneva Conventions, U.S. law, and military law. For that, he was captured, tortured, and renditioned himself by his military superiors. He has now sued them, and his case is pending, is going to the Supreme Court. His attorney is none other than Mick Harrison, who wrote that important law review article on Gravel versus U.S. that got the 28 pages finally declassified and released and JASTA passed. So he's very, very important. He also, and this is important for you to know, he also personally found the WMD in Iraq. It is not the case that there was no WMD found in Iraq. You will understand that the WMD that he personally found in the bunkers in Iraq were VX nerve gas. Now that's in the news right now. VX nerve gas, actually the liquid form of VX, but he found VX nerve gas canisters and 1,000-pound bombs that were specially designed to mount those VX nerve gas bombs, and has proof, this is all in his court case, documents going to the Supreme Court, he has proof that it was George Bush Sr. and Cheney who personally got them there to Saddam Hussein of Iraq. And in addition to that, so he was the person who found the WMD in Iraq, and it's VX, it's the liquid form of VX, this incredibly lethal when it's aerialized. So it can be dispersed, it's weaponized by making it dispersible in the air. That's when it's really lethal. They use the liquid form of it to kill the half-brother of the current leader of North Korea. But VX is in the news, so you really need to hear this. You really need to.
Right, it was WMD.
It was WMD because WMD, by the Pentagon's own definition, is chemical. VX nerve gas is chemical, biological, and nuclear. They led you to believe that it was only nuclear they were looking for. No, they were looking for any WMD, and they found it. And the Pentagon covered it up. And you will.
Trump was right that the election was rigged because the Republicans rigged it.
Yeah, that's exactly. So be sure and listen to this. It's only 28 minutes. It's on YouTube under this title, Iraqi WMD and Torture Bombshell. So I did want you to know that. All right. Thank you.